Hello everyone, welcome back. It is time for another spooky story. So when I originally started my spooky story series, I was mainly talking about ghosts, and I've diverged from that for the last two videos, but we're back at it, you guys, because I like ghosts. Am I a believer, a skeptic? I don't really know. I think I fall in the middle. I've never had anything super definitive happen to me, but I have had some things happen around me that I can't explain. So for that, I'm like, maybe, possibly, but I do love telling ghost tales. So today we are going to be diving into a story. This one comes out of Florida because Florida's got a lot of spooky stuff. Actually, this one location in Florida has a ton of spooky stuff because this is going to be the second time I have told a story from this location. Before we jump into it, spooky stories are where I tell you a spooky story and do my makeup at the same time. So if you like this series, definitely hit the thumbs up button so I know to continue this. I don't really know if this is something that people are interested in. Anyways, let's jump into today's story. Okay, let me fix this ghost clip for real. My hair is looking a hot mess today. I feel like the shirt makes me look like I'm out of colonial time period. Perfect. It's perfect. Briefly mentioned, this story is in a similar location to a video I've done before. If you guys have been here for the last year or so, then you know I did a video last year for the series that was titled A Perfumed Ghost. Don't know if you guys saw it, but if you did, then you would know that that video was based out of St. Augustine, and that is where we are going back today. Now, I'm a military wife and we are currently living in Florida. So I figured, I got to, while I've been living in Florida, tell a couple spooky tales from the area. The fort that I told the last story about is literally right across the water from this lighthouse. And today we are talking about the St. Augustine Lighthouse. Also, before I get into the eye look, this eye look was inspired by someone I saw on Instagram, so I'll put them up right now. This is who inspired today's look. I'm trying it out. Testing the waters, if you will. Across the water from the fort the Castile Fort, lies the St. Augustine Lighthouse. It sits right on the northern edge of Anastasia Island, and it's been there since the mid-1500s, so since the 16th century. Kind of like we talked on in that other video, St. Augustine is one of the oldest settlements in Florida. It's been through a lot since, America's founding. It's, again, one of the oldest settlements, so it's just seen a lot. I mean, it has seen, the first colonizations of America. It has seen the 100-year war. It has seen a lot of famine. And not only has St. Augustine been there through all of that, so has this lighthouse. This lighthouse has been just in the mecca of history. Now, looking up at this lighthouse, it's pretty unassuming. It looks like a lighthouse. It's kind of like a Beetlejuicy lighthouse. It's black and white, spiral. Really cool. I personally really like lighthouses. I think they're just really interesting things. And for me, have always given me a sense of peace. Like, I know a lot of people have been lonely and all of that in lighthouses that have had to work them. But like, there's something so comforting knowing that there's someone out there looking out for you in the big open wide ocean. Like, I've always thought that was like kind of nice. So like, even looking at pictures of this lighthouse, now I have not visited St. Augustine. I really should. I have family apparently that lives there, but I haven't personally been myself. Oh, Wallace is at, my dog's at the door. Hang on. Wallace, I'm telling ghost stories. Come in. Do you want to listen to the ghost stories? But looking at the pictures, I thought it was just it's a really pretty lighthouse in my opinion. And like I said, I just kind of like lighthouses generally anyways. I felt a nice sense of calm looking at the photos of it, but apparently there is no calm here and I have misread. So like I briefly mentioned, St. Augustine has been around for a long time. And so it makes sense that, typically we don't say that ghosts come out of nothingness. It makes sense that, ghosts have probably come from some of this assorted past. Now, much like the fort I talked about, this first entity that a lot of people see, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this one. My story is mainly going to be devolved around the other ghost that I want to talk about. But this first ghost is much like the one from the fort across the water, is that it likes to leave scents for you. So the ghost is often, I've seen it mainly referred to as the man. That's it. The man, the myth, the legend. And much like our brethren over at the fort, this man, the man, enjoyed a good cigar. So a lot of people have reported smelling the sickly sweet smell of a cigar, which my husband also smokes cigars on occasion. And I quite like the smell of a good cigar, so I don't feel like this would bother me at all. Also, I'm gonna take a momentary lapse to draw my little ghosties on my eyeballs. Pause, please. You can often know that he's near you because you'll smell that sweet, sweet smell of cigar. And like I said, I really personally don't mind the scent of cigar, so I think that's quite pleasant. I mean, that doesn't sound so bad. But it would be kind of creepy to know that like no one is in there smoking cigars and then you just smell it. Unfortunately, I did read that the smell of the cigar isn't really the only thing you're kind of left with when the man is around. Most people that note smelling the cigars also just talk about this awful sense of foreboding and just ickiness that kind of comes with it. So unfortunately, as pleasant as I might find the smell of cigars to be, apparently the spirit just doesn't feel very nice. They believe the man ghost was tied to a mariner that used to work at the lighthouse because some people have commented that they've seen what they thought was a figure wearing like a mariner's jacket and a hat, cigar in his mouth, or even a pipe. I've seen some people say it was a pipe. Those are two different things, but cigar smell or tobacco smell probably is what they're associating. So most people comment that they see like a tall, lanky figure walking around, and they'll see this figure walking up like the spiral staircase and on the catwalk where like the light of the lighthouse is, almost as if someone is still working. So most people believe that the man could be one of two people. Some people believe it's William Russell, who was someone who had worked at the lighthouse in the 1850s. I couldn't see if he I don't think anything horrible happened to him. I think he just passed away, but he had just worked at the lighthouse in the 1850s. The other person that some people think that it might be is Joseph Andrew. And this one I'm like a little bit more tempted if we want to believe that, you know, hauntings can come out of tragedy mainly, because Joseph Andrew worked at the lighthouse and was on some scaffolding in 1859, so not even long after William had been working there, but in 1859 he was on some scaffolding putting on some fresh paint onto the lighthouse and fell. So a lot of people think that that's who they're seeing, but again, we don't really have much to go on other than the outfit, the tall lankiness, and the cigar smell, which I guess both men are kind of attributed to. So take that how you will. But just know, if you ever saw me in a lighthouse and I saw someone walking up the spiral staircase that didn't look 100% like there or human, I'm leaving. Now, the main reason I'm here to tell this story, though, is about the Pittee children, or Pittee children. This was what kind of prompted me to look into the lighthouse a little bit more. Now, I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen videos on this. This is one of the more famous haunted lighthouses in America. Now, typically children weren't something that were often associated with lighthouses. Typically people who lived in lighthouses, a lot of the times did live there with their spouses if they had them. A lot of times they did live on their own, and there's a lot of, you know, historical accounts of people who worked lighthouses commenting on how lonely it is. Having your entire family live in the lighthouse with you did happen, obviously, because people would have families, but I feel like it was a lot more rare, at least in the research I've done. I haven't noticed as many people who worked lighthouses having like their full family live with them. There's just a lot of people like with husbands and wives, but with no kids seemed pretty often, and then just bachelors. But in 1872, this was definitely not the case. Hezekiah, I don't know how to pronounce this name appropriately. I'm pretty sure it's a Hebrew name, maybe. Now, Mr. Pittee brought his family over from Maine, so not a short trip by any means. I mean, he's going from one corner to the other corner of the eastern coast. So he brought his family from Maine. He brought with him his wife Mary and their children Mary Adelaide, Eliza, Edward, and Carrie. When the Pittee family moved into the lighthouse, like I mentioned, it was currently under construction. So they moved in 1871. In 1872, there were some renovations that had been started on the lighthouse, just like updating it, fixing it up. You know, it had been around for a while. It needed some upkeep. So there was construction happening on the site. As I feel most kids would, the kids viewed this as like a great place to be. The construction area. It was basically just like a giant, very dangerous playground for the kids. So often while their dad worked and their mom, you know, took care of the homestead, the kids would, you know, be sent outside to play. And I mean, where better to play than a construction site? For a lot of us listening, especially if we're parents ourselves, we're all listening going, oh my God, no, horrible idea. Who let these kids out? But as, you know, former children ourselves, at least most of us were former children, I think. For me, playing in a construction site sounds fun as heck. Like, there's probably giant piles of dirt everywhere. There's like strange equipment to climb on. I was always finding myself up in some random tree as a child with like no shoes on. So like, I can't talk very much. This was also a common occurrence for these kids. It's not like they went out one day and something happened. They played in this construction site for a year. By 1873, construction had continued, and at that point, only the foundation and about 42 feet of the tower were like done, being finished and redone. So there was still quite a bit to go. And to move supplies, which were needed for the construction, there was like a railway cart. Ooh, why is that hard for me to say? That would move supplies back and forth between where the ships would dock outside the lighthouse onto the land. Now, obviously, kind of like sledding, riding this cart back and forth between the docks and the lighthouse was a favorite pastime of the kids. I mean, honestly, who can blame them, right? Think of it as a Victorian era roller coaster. Much like many things in the Victorian era, my bronzer just betrayed me. There was no safety features. It was a cart used to haul supplies, not children. So again, kind of like playing in a construction yard, maybe not the best thing for these kids to be doing, but you know. So how this cart would work was, again, it would go between the lighthouse and the docks, and it would go up and down these rail carts, and the only thing that stopped this cart was a piece of wood at the very end that would stop it from going over into the dock, into the water. On July 10th, 1873, the three Pittee sisters, Mary, Eliza, and Carrie, ages 15, 13, and 4, were riding the carts. They also had some friends along. There was an unknown African-American girl. So during the time, they believed that that little girl's father probably worked on the site, but I've tried looking and I cannot find any record of who this little girl is, which is really unfortunate and just speaks to the times a lot, but she was also on the cart. As they're riding the cart, like I said, they were speeding down this little railway, probably having a great time. But unfortunately, like I mentioned, the only thing that stops them from going into the water is a piece of wood. And on July 10th, that piece of wood did not stop the cart. So the 4 girls went tumbling into the water. And I'm not sure how big of a drop it is, but what ended up being the worst part was, I don't think it was a big drop into the water, but what happened is when the girls toppled into the bay or into the water, the cart fell on top of them. Luckily, a worker who was there at the time, his name was Dan Sessions, who saw the entire thing happen, ran down and trying to get the cart off of the girls. Luckily, I think he responded like pretty quickly, but not luckily, this cart was incredibly heavy and he had to work for a while. I don't know if there wasn't anyone else around or like he just, you know, panicked and didn't, you know, he really didn't have time to respond and try and get more help. He went down and he managed to get the cart off of the girls. Unfortunately, 3 out of the 4 girls had drowned under that cart. One did survive. Carrie, the youngest, the 4-year-old, did end up surviving, luckily. So silver lining in that regard that she lived, but the other 2 Pittee girls died and the friend that they were playing with also passed away. The Pittee family held a funeral, and obviously after that, the construction site at the lighthouse was actually shut down. It was deemed dangerous and completely just shut down. Now that accident happened 145 years ago, and people say that strange stuff has been happening ever since. A lot of the stories that we have on account have come from people that have actually worked and lived in the lighthouse, not just people going on ghost tours, which, by the way, you can go on a ghost tour at the St. Augustine Lighthouse. But in the 1950s, a lighthouse worker reported constantly, like the entire time he worked there, that he was hearing footsteps from like the stairs in the lighthouse and from like above him at all times, and he was there alone. He said he would just constantly hear like the pitter patter of little tiny footsteps just constantly going back and forth or up and down the stairs, to the point where he was like, you cannot pay me enough to stay another night in this lighthouse. No, thank you. It is haunted. So this man was named James Pippin. He worked in the lighthouse from 1953 to 1955. And most lighthouse keepers stay in the keeper house, like in the lighthouse. He ended up not living there because of, like I said, he said it was haunted. And he was the last person to even attempt to live in the lighthouse. He ended up living in a small house a little bit down the way instead of staying at the lighthouse permanently because he could not handle those little tiny footsteps. He was not about that life. He said, ghost, not on my watch. In 1955, after James was the last one to have lived there, the lighthouse became fully automated, so no one needed to man the lighthouse anymore, which was probably a relief to anyone involved. And once the lighthouse was automated, the Coast Guard ended up taking over and would appoint someone to go and like check on the lighthouse, but no one needed to live there anymore. Because no one technically lived there and needed to live there to work, the keeper's hut, the house associated with the lighthouse, was actually rented out for a time. In the 1960s, someone was renting the house, and he claims that while he was living there, he woke up one night to stare at the end of his bed and see a little girl just standing at the edge of his bed, looking at him sleep. He says that he wasn't sure what he was seeing, so he like blinked his eyes really hard. You know, like when you're trying to get the sleep out of your eyes, you like blink really hard. He said he did that, and when he like fully opened his eyes again, she was gone. In 1970, no one was actually living in the keeper's hut at the time, but the house just mysteriously caught on fire one night while no one was there. Now, could this have been a strange electrical phenomenon? Possibly. It could have also been ghosts. The fire actually ended up gutting the house, leaving only the basement and a few other small areas of the house remaining, but for the most part, it was destroyed in this fire that no one knows how it started. After it burned, St. Johns County actually ended up purchasing it with the intention of demolishing it, but some women from the local, like, historical society basically actually bought it out from them and kept it and redid the keeper's hut. Like, I think they tried to replicate it as close as possible to the original one. The renovation took 15 years and $1.2 million to restore. And again, I'm pretty sure they wanted to do it like authentically to like how it was originally. While the renovations were happening, a number of the volunteers and people who worked the site trying to renovate it just always talked about weird things happening on site. Most people said that the basement was definitely the like hot spot for all of the activity. Remember, the basement was one of the only places that didn't burn in the random 1970 fire. Staff that worked the building apparently would frequently call in psychics to come and talk to who they thought were spirits in the building. A recent account from a psychic that went and visited opened up a session and apparently talked to a young African-American girl named Eleanor or Ellie, is what they think came through. And again, like I said, I could never find a name of the girl that ended up drowning with the Pittee sisters or Petty sisters. So could that have been one of the girls that drowned from the cart? At night, a lot of people who are visiting the site often say they hear giggling and footsteps, like disembodied footsteps and giggling coming from random corners of the house. A lot of people think this is the girls playing hide and go seek in the house while you are there. A lot of people say that they will also hear giggling from up in the lighthouse room, like where the actual light is. They'll hear it coming from above them. And again, kind of like from the 1950s, footsteps on the catwalk and on the steps at night have returned now, and people hear them all the time. One story that I did find was a woman was touring the lighthouse and found herself standing on the staircase because she heard footsteps coming around her. And when she went to go move again, once they stopped, she looked down and her shoelace was tied to one of the rails on the staircase. Was it her mind playing tricks on her? Did a ghost child play a joke on her or like some strange phenomenon of her shoelaces getting stuck and tied to a rail. Rarely do I hear stories or read stories about people seeing full apparitions, but people who have said that they've seen full apparitions from the lighthouse do claim that they look like children. One story was a guest was staying in the keeper hut and were out on hammocks near the water, and they say that a young girl in a Victorian dress came over to speak to them. My camera just started doing weird stuff. Strange. That was weird. I wish I had had my phone recording that. So my camera does face recognition and it just like went off my face when I said that. That was and like focused up here, like behind me. It gave me goosebumps. That wasn't what this, it's doing it again. It's like bouncing. Well, what a pleasant note. I was actually almost done with this video too and nothing weird has happened. Anyways, like I said, there were some guests there staying in a hammock and they said that a young girl in a Victorian dress came up to them and started trying to talk to them, but they like couldn't hear anything, and then she kind of just like vanished when they like looked away and tried to figure out what was going on. Other people said that they'll see them in the distance, they'll see like full bodies of children in the distance, hear that giggling, the footsteps, just lots of noise, lots of activity. But for the most part, I've never read anything that said that it felt malicious. The most foreboding feeling is the man, which I think since the fire happened, maybe it was the man. I think since the fire happened, there's been less stories of the man. A lot more people are saying that they see children roaming around the lighthouse. So maybe they took him out. Maybe they took him out in that fire. That's what happened. They were like, he's ruining playtime. We gotta get rid of this man. The man. The myth, the legend. And that, guys, is today's entire spooky story. This was on the Pittee Girls from the St. Augustine Lighthouse and the tragedy that befell them, and if they might still be roaming at the lighthouse, just having a good grand time, it sounds like, honestly. It sounds like they're playing pranks and jokes on people, and it sounds like a great time in the afterlife. If you enjoyed this video, definitely make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and remember, there are always spooks to be found. And I hope that means I see all of you in my next video. Bye!